Great to see each of you. My name is Shane Jimerson, and I am the editor-elect of School Psychology Review. And I am also a professor here at the University of California in Santa Barbara. Today, I am super enthusiastic to share information about preparing your research for publication, publishing your dissertation. So I've got a series of questions that some students at the University of Wisconsin-Madison had posed, and I'll share some brief information and reflection as related to each of those. Now, hopefully some of you are active on social media. If you are active on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, YouTube, you can also connect with School Psych Review in any of those social media contexts. And as I will share during the presentation, there's some great opportunities to both access as well as share information within the social media context. So please join our SPR community and follow on each of those social media contexts. Okay, so I've got a series of questions here that the agenda for today is I'll provide brief presentation, can also answer questions. If you have something that comes up, interject. I'll try to take a look at the chat, but also we'll have time at the end, so you feel free to write notes or identify questions, but if you have something that comes up and you want to interject, feel free to do so. And we'll have a bit of discussion, bit of questions during our time together. So I have just a few slides to share. So the questions that sort of are driving this presentation and information are the following: what advice for students regarding the publication process, factors to consider and such? What factors would be useful to keep in mind when thinking about evaluating interventions for linguistically and culturally diverse individuals? What have you seen as some of the core components of what makes a student successful in their dissertation research and building a research career? What things should students think about regarding methodology? And then also what makes a strong discussion section, as well as considering future implications. So those are some of the topics that I've prepared for. So let's begin with the first question. What advice do you have for students regarding the publication process? So it's kind of a broad question, but I've got 10 different pro tip elements here that I wanted to briefly walk through, and then I can share some examples of these. So first, you want to think about who publishes the journal, what is the focus of the journal, who's involved. And so you want to take a look at that for each of the potential outlets in terms of navigating the publication process. That's a great place to begin. There are numerous journals in the field of school psychology and related journals as well. So it doesn't just have to be a journal that specifically focuses on school psychology. There are many journals, and certainly publishing in those is highly valued and makes important contributions as well. But you want to see who publishes the journal, the focus of the journal. Take a look at the journal leadership team. That will give you a good sense of what some of their areas of emphasis may be, what areas they highlight, what expertise they bring to the table. Also consider who can access the journal. So who do you want to share the results of your dissertation with in terms of this context, thinking about it from a student perspective? You do all the good work to get through your dissertation, to complete your program and get your PhD. But when it comes to the publishing that dissertation, you also want to think about who do you want to share those results with? Is it that you want to emphasize bringing science to practice? Do you want to have practitioners access your content, your publication? Do you want policymakers to access your content? Do you want teaching professionals? Do you want special education professionals? Would you like most all school psychologists? Or is it more that you're trying to have an academic community read your article and you want scholars, and those scholars could be in various fields, school psych, ed psych, special ed, higher ed. So think about who can access the journal or who reads the journal, and also think about what are the commitments of the journal. And I'll share a few examples of how you can look into this here in a few moments. But sometimes that's indicated by topics. Sometimes it's explicitly stated, so that's helpful when they outline the commitments of the journal on their webpage. But then also sometimes they feature special topic sections or these sorts of things that can also give you some insights into what are the commitments of the journal. Also, how to submit to the journals, an important consideration. At this juncture, most of them are through these online portals. So there's some sort of commonality and similarity across the various journals, but that is important in thinking about on the front end, because the formatting of the documents may vary depending upon the particular portal or particular journal that you're submitting to. So take a look at the author guidelines. The author guidelines help to articulate how the content should be formatted, what the length of the abstract can be, if it differs from sort of a generic or general APA 7th edition type of guideline. It also, oftentimes the web page will highlight the types of articles that are welcome. So for instance, your dissertation might involve a range of methodology. It could be a mixed method study, it could be qualitative, it could be quantitative. In some instances, meta-analyses and/or there's often a literature review component, which, as I'll talk about here in a bit, sometimes a dissertation is so big that you're basically going to extract different components to publish in various journals, journal articles, and other outlets. So it might be that your dissertation is more than one publication, and you might be navigating this process across multiple papers that you prepare. So you want to look at the types of articles that are welcome, see if there's special topics that they focus on, and also ultimately clearly stating the contributions of the paper. These are some things in advance that I wanted to front load you with. Obviously, do a careful copy edit prior to submission. So these are some of the key considerations. I'm going to share for you, for example, some of these considerations as related to the School Psychology Review Journal. For one, I can speak to that because I have perspective on precisely what these elements would be for School Psych Review. But for two, I offer you a concrete example of what you would be looking at in some of these instances, okay? So those are the quick overview of the top 10 sort of pro tips, plus the bonus one about carefully copy editing. And now I'm gonna walk you through several of these different elements, and then I'll also address the other questions. So for instance, I told you that it's very important to look at the leadership team. And so for instance, with the School Psych Review, editorial leadership team includes myself as the editor-in-chief, but it also includes 13 additional very distinguished, highly qualified colleagues who represent the senior editors and associate editors. All of us are involved as action editors. So any of the 14 individuals you see throughout on the screen, from Frank Worrell out in California, Sam Song over in Nevada, Tyler Renshaw over in Utah, Amanda, who's up in your neighborhood up there near Wisconsin and Minnesota. You've also got Francis there. Dr. Wong is in Missouri, Shamilia down in Texas, Jorge, again, also in Texas. Gary's up in Illinois. You've got Scott up there at Ohio State University. Pererna's over at Columbia University. Dorothy's there at University of North Carolina. Shizhen is University of Maryland. And then you've got Stacy Ann all the way down University of South Florida over there. So that's kind of the composition. And when you see that, those individuals, many of you will recognize their names. You'll know the types of work and scholarship that they engage in. And as a student, that can give you an inclination of who's going to be managing those manuscripts as the action editors. The action editors would be the individual who's responsible for ultimately inviting each of the editorial board members, processing the paper in terms of looking at their reviews and then making a decision. So any of those individuals that are listed as the action editors, typically those are associate editors or senior editors, or maybe they have other titles, senior editor of certain topic area. So you'd want to start by taking a look at that. Now, also there's various guest editors. I wanted to mention that as well here, because like, for instance, we've got right now we've got Pam Finning and Matthew Mayer, Amanda Nickerson, Sylvia Thompson, Lillian Duran are both special ed faculty, very distinguished colleagues focusing on linguistically diverse learners. They're up at the University of Oregon. I think a lot of you know Amanda's up at SUNY, Matthew's up at Rutgers. And then you know Pam as well, Loyola Marymount. So I think you folks recognize a lot of these individuals. For the special topic sections, we typically bring in guest editors who team with our leadership, with our members of our leadership team, such that we're able to expand our capacity to manage potentially large numbers of manuscripts, right? For instance, on the one that we were working with, Matthew and Amanda, we ended up having over 40 submissions in June, specifically focused on the topic, a special topic of school violence and school safety. So that's important first step, is just take a look at the composition of the leadership of the journal. Okay, so I've shared a little bit about that. Now, the other thing is thinking about the review process. Journals have various cultures and various considerations. This is our emphasis within School Psych Review. For one, we're focused on advancing high quality and timely reviews. So generally speaking, we're committed to providing a decision within 30 days of submission to the journal. There are a few instances, only a handful, that have gone beyond that, say of the roughly 130 manuscripts that we've made decisions on so far, or 130 decisions that we've made. So that's part of it, is what's the culture, because sometimes when you submit, you want to look at what's the average time for decision, because sometimes as a student, early career scholar, you don't necessarily want your work to sit out there for 6 months or 9 months or a year before you even get feedback. It's going to be optimal for you to get timely, high quality and constructive feedback, which, for instance, that's what we do within School Psych Review. So you want to take a look at that. Most journals have this type of data that's posted. Otherwise, your advisors can provide you with some guidance on which journals are sitting at 60 days, 90 days, 120 days. But you take that into consideration. But then also in terms of what's the guidance and direction of the reviewers when they're taking a look at your work, right? So here I've listed what I emphasize, what we emphasize as a leadership team in our SPR reviewer guidelines. So we are basically directing and expecting that each of the reviewers will be kind whenever possible. And as Dalai Lama says, it's always possible. That they will be constructive, that the reviews will be objective, that they'll be clear, transparent, respectful, organized, succinct, and kind. And I do start with kind and I do end with kind. And I do remind all of our reviewers that that's purposeful. It's not a typo, because we understand that for some individuals, especially for students, this may be the first paper that you're submitting. It might be the first paper that you're the lead author on. But the point is, most manuscripts, most papers that are submitted do have students involved. And you always want to make certain that the feedback that we're providing is going to be inspiring and informative and constructive, and not belittling and not destructive. Like, this might be the first paper that you ever been involved with submitting. We definitely don't want it to be the last, right? And so there is sort of a culture of rejection that accompanies being in academia, that those of us who have been in it for decades, you kind of develop a thick skin and you roll with it and such. But especially early on, you know, this idea that you might work really hard for years on a project and then you'll submit it somewhere and they'll just tell you how awful it is and how bad it is and that you don't know what you're doing and you should have done a whole different thing, or you should have asked other questions. That can be incredibly challenging, demoralizing, and such. So again, within the context of a culture of rejection, where again, for most journals, you're taking a look at those submission rates to get a sense of what their rejection rates are. For many of the journals in school psychology, you're probably sitting between 50% to 95% of the papers that are submitted ultimately are rejected and not published. So again, just starting at that point, recognizing that in some journals, you might have a 75 or 85 or 90% rejection rate. That may also influence where you determine you want to submit your work on the front end, in addition to how long are they going to spend reviewing it and what's the quality that you might anticipate in terms of getting reviews back. You might also consider that additional element as well. Okay, so also you might take a look to see what are the special topic sections, right? So for instance, I mentioned a few of the ones that we're doing within School Psych Review. I mentioned in July, June, July, we did the school violence and school safety, the COVID-19 and school psych, adaptations and new directions for the field. We've got a number of manuscripts in that area. Presently, we've got due date that you can still submit for unlocking the promise of multi-tiered systems of support for linguistically diverse students, addressing youth suicide through prevention, intervention, and postvention, reconceptualizing school psychology for the 21st century, the future of school psychology, theory, methods, and practice to advance Equity in School Psych that's due in January, and then Promoting the Development of Black Males, Supporting Social, Behavioral, Emotional, and Academic Success, due in February 2021. I know we already have an additional one that we haven't yet formally announced on the various websites that will focus on school climate and facilitating student social emotional learning and such. That will also be due in 2021. So that's important because it might be that your dissertation work fits really neatly within one of those special topic sections. However, say that the timing isn't right for your particular dissertation project. What I also want to emphasize is that if the journal is publishing on that topic, on that special topic, during one point in time, they will also be looking for papers in the future as well. So my point there is, even if the timing doesn't work out precisely for your dissertation to be done and prepared in time to submit to a special topic section, you've got to file this information away so that you know that when your work is ready, you're going to potentially submit it to that journal because they have an interest and an enthusiasm and a commitment to that particular topic, for instance. So that's a little pro tip that a lot of students don't really think about. They think, oh, I missed the chance. Oh, that train has left the station. But it's actually a really good piece of information that you can hold on to, because I'll tell you what, we're going to publish information in all of these topics in School Psych Review for the next 3 to 4 years, right? I'll be editor. We're going to publish a lot of other topics as well. So just because the topic of your dissertation is not featured in a special topic section, that does not mean you should not necessarily submit to that journal. I'm not suggesting that. But what I am suggesting is that when you see areas of foci, focal areas, especially special topic, special issue type of context, that then you could submit your work to those. That's a great opportunity to get your work considered and potentially featured within a really great arena where there's lots of other associated high quality work in that same area. There's one more point that I was thinking of in terms of this, that you're looking to see if there are special topic sections. You're seeing that whether there's a link there. You can also still submit in the future. So keep all those things in mind as you're sort of considering the journal. Also, I mentioned it's super important to do the copy editing. And again, most of your advisors will be working with you and giving you that feedback all the way through the development phase of your dissertation. But sometimes you finish your dissertation and you're a bit more independent when you might be writing up the journal articles or other publication outlets, because there's a lot of other possibilities besides journals, but I'm just focusing particularly on preparing your dissertation for publication in a journal. You want to make certain that you go through it, carefully copy edit, attending to the APA style formatting. And most all of the journals are using this, but there's a few other formats. So take a look at the author guidelines, as I mentioned, and be certain it's clean, and that's going to be reflecting high quality, okay? Because there's nothing worse than to have your cover letter with typos, and then you go to the abstract and there's more challenges, and you're just giving a sense of, if you can't do the cover letter without typos and the abstract without typos, or the title is missing a word, that doesn't reassure someone or give confidence that you've got all the other details throughout the study, including your methods and analyses. So really attend to the copy editing and be consistent with the prevailing guide that is suggested. Mostly it's the 7th edition of the APA. Now, also, I mentioned think about the distribution and the impact of that journal in particular. Who do you want to read that article, and how would you like that scholarship in your science to influence, right? So I wanted to highlight, so for instance, School Psych Review, some of you that are engaged with social media will recognize that with School Psych Review, we have a commitment to bringing science, like high quality science, publishing excellent high quality science that's going to have an impact and an influence on practice as well as policy. And so what we've done as I've come in as editor-elect is we've established a social media presence across Facebook, across Instagram, across Twitter, as well as YouTube, to really focus on enhancing the engagement of school psychologists and allied professionals for increasing the impact of your journal article so that we can get it distributed to other scholars, to other practitioners, that we can celebrate the contributions, which some of you might have seen that we do a student scholar spotlight every month now that we feature across the social media outlets. We also do a scholar spotlight each month, and then we also do a leadership spotlight highlighting leaders in the journal that are contributing there. We want to amplify awareness of the work that you're doing across these various platforms. We also have a commitment to advancing diversity. And that is a clear commitment as reflected in our leadership team, in our editorial board, in our student editorial board, that we intend to publish work that is going to advance the field of school psychology in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion, and meeting the needs of tremendously diverse children and families in our schools throughout the country. And that links to promoting social justice and considering a social justice lens, centering social justice in our scholarship and such. So really encouraging that type of work, which some of you might have a shared interest in. Some of your dissertations may be in those areas. So again, if you are interested in having that additional amplification and impact and the types of things that we're doing, then you can consider School Psych Review, or also consider the other journals and what they're doing in these areas or not. You can look at their social media, you can look at the way that their distribution is and such. So also you can read more about this in the communique. I think a lot of you are probably NASP members. A lot of students in school psychology are NASP members. And just recently, we published this piece in the communique, School Psychology Review, Social Media Brings Science to Practice. And you can read that if you want to check it out. Okay, we've talked about a lot of the details. Now, one of the other things that we're doing is attempting to expand the distribution and impact. So we're doing 120-second summaries. These are the SPR 120-second summaries. And this is just an example here of this particular colleague who was featured just a couple of months ago with a 120-second summary. In less than 3 days, this particular YouTube video had over 200 views, and many colleagues, the link to the actual article is right below. And we're able to feature these and make the articles full access. So in general, when you think about readership, like School Psych Review goes out to over 24,000 members of NASP have access to it. That's going to be over 22,000 school psychologists, practicing school psychologists, for instance. So in this instance, we found that by providing the 120-second summary, that 2-minute summary, a practitioner or a scholar or a student can watch the video, and if they're interested, then they can click on the link and download the full PDF file of the article. So this is just another example, just trying to share with you things to think about, okay? So the second question, just in brief, was what factors would be useful to keep in mind when thinking about evaluating interventions or developing interventions for linguistically and culturally diverse individuals? On this topic, I want to preface this with saying that you should definitely consult with experts in this arena, in this area. I would not consider myself a leading expert in this arena, but I know some, and that's important, critically important. And many of them are involved with our editorial board and our leadership team. But importantly, you should seek out consultation. And part of it is one of the publications I featured here is Child Trends. They have a guide to incorporating racial and ethnic equity perspective throughout the research process. And I thought that would be the most useful information to share as related to this specific question, because in this question, there's a lot of it depends and who exactly is the population, the linguistic, the culture, the diversity that's being referred to. Well, there's so many considerations that I thought that it'd be most helpful to provide this sort of guidance of a general approach. So in this Child Trends article, they featured these 5 components, these 5 principles. And I really think that these can be valuable principles of a racial and equity perspective. So the first is to examine your own background and biases, and based on many of the discussions we've been having in school psych and among school psych leaders and in the professional associations and in our university programs, this as a first step, critically important to understand in your own sort of self-exploration and trying to get clarity. And you have to do good work yourself to start with. You can't just look around and ask somebody like, hey, how should I, work to address X or Y? We each individually need to engage in self-exploration and self-examination. Then also to make a commitment to dig deeper into the data that you're looking at within your study. And sometimes you've got diverse populations within your study, but sometimes we find that individuals aren't doing analyses at that level, or maybe they hadn't thought about examining it at that particular level. They might be grouping everyone all together and such, and making kind of these seeking general conclusions. So one concrete idea is to look deeper into the data that you're collecting within your projects and dissertations, and all the better to include this information in your planning process, because I know one of the questions had to do with methodology, which I'll mention here momentarily. Also, recognize the impact that the research process itself has on communities, and acknowledge your role in ensuring that research benefits the communities that you're working with. So making certain that you're not just taking advantage of the populations, but rather how your work will contribute. Establish that in advance and be committed to that. Also, the fourth dimension they highlight is to engage communities as partners in research. And that's another piece of what I was suggesting previously about how to educate yourself. Oftentimes it's engaging with both leading experts and scholars, but also engaging in those discussions and listen to the children, to the families, to those that are living these experiences. So to further inform your methods, to further inform your measures, and ultimately to further inform your interpretation of the findings from these projects that you're engaged in. And then finally, the fifth that they offer as a guiding principle is to guard against the implicit or explicit assumption that white is the default position. So again, that's important not to use that as the default. Okay, let me share a bit more about this. Third question, what have you seen as core components of what makes a student successful in their dissertation research and in building a research career? This almost seems like it could be a whole nother session, a full hour session, but I think the image captures everything, right? I think you recognize what this is. I've always been so inspired. I remember as an undergraduate when I was taking anthropology courses, and I learned about how these chimps would use these sticks in order to get the ants out of the anthill. They're using their tools. So this is what it's about: passion, creativity, strong methods, and embracing the complexity, which I think is sort of captured in the way that the chimps get the ants out of the anthills, because they figure out what the right tools and methods are. They know the objective. They're passionate about getting in there to eat those ants and such. And so really, as you're looking at your own areas of scholarship, you'll thrive if you're passionate and you're enthusiastic about it. And also the creativity that you bring to it, and then understanding that these are complex challenges that are there. And then each of you are learning about really strong methodologies, including being theoretically grounded and using the appropriate analytical strategies and such. So this question is much larger, much bigger, but I at least wanted to entertain it and give you initial response. And then the fourth was, what things should students think about regarding methodology? Again, this could vary tremendously depending upon what types of questions you're answering and what types of methods would be appropriate. So at the first glance of this one, I would say, well, it depends broadly, but if whatever that methodology is, really being precise in stating the question. So it's an interesting element here that as you asked me the question about what should you think about regarding methodology, I quickly went to, well, what is this precise question you're asking? Because you want to state the questions in your research with precision, such that then that will inform the appropriate methodology, whether you're engaging in activities that will require qualitative, quantitative, mixed methods, participatory action research, whatever the right methods will be. And to be doing it rigorously, that's clearly important, not taking shortcuts, doing it very rigorously. And then again, the methodology needs to be appropriate to address the question. So as I was thinking about this question about what things should students think about, it all starts with the questions, being very precise. Think about the most rigorous way that you could examine and answer those questions. And importantly, that should all drive the particular methods that you're utilizing. So it's not a one size fits all. Okay, the fifth question was, what makes a strong discussion section and future implications? So let me just share that in our SPR reviewer guidelines, we have a couple of strategies. One is that we present them with a document that provides an overview. In addition, each of the editorial board members and student editorial board members, they're completing the Nature Masterclass on peer review. And it's about, I think it's about 4 hours roughly of going through systematic peer review. And that's certainly one that I would encourage, because to the degree that you're thinking deeply about reviewing a paper, it's informing how you should be thinking about it as to writing the paper. So I'm using the information here that we highlight for our editorial board members in terms of providing their review to inform you as a student as to what should be included to make a really strong discussion section and highlighting future implications. So for one, I highlight at the beginning that this section should tell a coherent story, all right? That question or the image there, so what? Like, that's what I enter into the discussion section thinking about as a reviewer, as an editor. So what, right? So you're going to want to tell that coherent story, what happened, what was discovered or confirmed, what is it there? You're answering that so what. So there's certain patterns of good reporting that we would anticipate that the author would follow in there. For instance, starting by describing in the simple terms what the data reveal, making reference to statistical analyses such as the significance or the goodness of fit or the other types of methodologies, reporting that information, evaluating the trends that were observed and explain the significance of the results to the wider, broader understanding. That could only be done by referencing the published research. So you're connecting the results of your study, the findings from your study, and situating them relative to the existing literature and the existing evidence and science. And then you also want to provide a critical analysis of the data that was collected, the methodology, the limitations. That's important to have in there. Again, if you're able to identify it and then still be able to highlight that the findings are meaningful and valuable and make a contribution, that's going to be much better than you not including that type of a limitation and each of the reviewers identifying that limitation, and then they're concerned that you didn't include it, so therefore they may decide to reject that manuscript. They might recommend rejection of the manuscript rather than, say, a major revision, because they don't see that you see what some of the challenges were. So that's an important piece of acknowledging the limitations and engaging in a critical analysis. Again, that's typically a paragraph or two. And then at some point, you want to gather all the information together into a single whole, and they should describe and discuss that overall story that's formed. So again, you want to lead into that with a bit. You want to have it be coherent throughout your discussion. And then ultimately, you want to conclude by reiterating, highlighting what the sort of take-home messages are. So broadly, that's what I would say in terms of what makes a strong discussion section. When the reviewers are reviewing it, and I would encourage you to ask yourself these same questions as you're reflecting on your own discussion sections. You might think about these types of questions. Do the data presented in the results support the claims that are made in the article, right? So think about that. That's a common concern, is that the discussion declarations go so far beyond the data that the reviewers don't feel comfortable recommending, revision or acceptance ultimately, because the author is taking a little bit of data and then going into a very different direction. So you want to keep that tethered in reality and what's reasonable. Do the data look reasonable considering the study design and the experiments or the methodologies that were used? Do the authors discuss this discrepancy in their results or the discussion? So you're again looking for that, as I mentioned. Does the description of the data in the text correspond to the figures? So oftentimes in those results and discussion sections, you'll see tables and figures. And sometimes there's not a strong connection between them. So for instance, the other one is also, do the authors describe data that's not present in the figures or fail to describe all the data presented in the display items in the text? So it goes both ways. As you're including tables and figures, be certain that you are clearly articulating what that information is within the text, but then also make certain that the information in the table and the figures is providing value-added information to what's in the text, right? So it kind of goes both ways. You have to approach that with some sensitivity. Okay, so those are 5 questions, just for example, that we would be asking as we're looking at your discussion section, thinking about whether it was strong and also thinking about possible future implications. Okay, so that was sort of a crash course. Went through that pretty rapidly. I know I speak pretty rapidly, but I want to open it up for questions, ideas, insights, comments. What do you folks think? And feel free to speak up.
I'm not sure if this is a silly question that would be like common knowledge, but you mentioned.
Hold on, my sound went off. So now I'll be able to hear you. Sorry about that.
No worries. You mentioned thinking about the audience, like your intended audience when thinking about where to submit. I'm wondering, how do you know who's accessing what, if that makes sense?
Yep. Well, that's a great question. And it's more difficult to discern when you're a student and you haven't had as much experience about this. Most of your advisors, you can always consult with your advisors to get their perspective. There's also a book that's written, which you can purchase a book that's focused on the journals, publishing in journals in school psychology that was recently published. And that book has a little bit of information from the editors of each of those journals sharing information. And again, it depends on if you're trying to get your outlet, you want that outlet to go out to practitioners, to scholars primarily. You're trying to think about who are the patrons, who are the readers, who are the subscribers, right, Brittany?
Yeah. I'm wondering how you know, like, which journals practitioners, for instance, are most often seeking out.
Right. And again, I think part of that's touching base with your advisors. Typically, they've got enough experience in it, or taking a look at the book that's focused on publishing in school psychology journals that does feature some of that type of information. I was quickly Googling it there. Right. Is that helpful?
It was. Thank you.
Good. Excellent question, and important to think about. And when you're a student, it's very difficult. I mean, I can remember when I was a student, 25, 30 years ago, and it's like, it was very, there was a lot of mystery about, journals. And partially like some journals, like they might have an impact factor where you feel like, oh, well, that impact factor is reflecting that it has high dissemination within academic circles. And so there's some instances where folks choose to publish in journals that have high impact factors, but not all high impact factor journals are necessarily going to be accessed by a practitioner. So for instance, an impact factor is not calculated by how many practitioners access it or download it or use it. That's going to be calculated based on how many other scholars cite it in their scholarship. So again, you always have to think about these multiple considerations. And we've mostly been talking about journals. My sense was thinking about how to publish your dissertation as a journal article, but it is also possible to publish it in other venues and formats. And it could be that you publish a journal article that features the data and the study, but then you could always publish a synthesis article into like the communique that also helps to try to bring that science to practice if the journal you published it in isn't likely to be distributed or disseminated to the practitioners, for instance, if that was your target population. Yeah. What other questions are you folks thinking about?
I also was just going to add to that, talking to your supervisors and other school psychologists in the community. I think that connection that academics maintain with schools and the community is really important to see what people are reading. And then when you're going to conferences, putting yourself out there, having conversations with people is really, really important, and networking on that front too.
Great ideas. Yeah, those are great ideas. And I did just want to mention the Publishing in School Psychology and Related Fields, an Insider's Guide. That's a book that was published just a few years ago by Randy Floyd. So if you are interested in trying to get a sense from the editor's perspectives, because each of the editors for various journals wrote those chapters, and that might be helpful for you to get a sense of where they think their target audience is and who they think is taking it in. But I love that suggestion of ask your supervisors, ask real school psychologists in the schools. That could possibly be even better. But I think most of the faculty, they know where the distribution is because they're making these decisions every day, aren't they? Right? I mean, most faculty are thinking about that in terms of where they might submit that manuscript based on to whom they would want to share that information or who's the target population. Yeah. Excellent. What other questions are you folks thinking about?
I have a question about the distribution impact. I was curious since like my own project is more like more likely to engage with the community since I'm like studying girls with autism and I plan to ask expert opinions from the community. And since it's likely going to be more of a longitudinal project, even though I plan to do part of it for my dissertation, I was curious, like, do you think publishing part of my project as you know, step by step, so to speak, and sort of engage a larger community by publishing an article? Do you think that ever works for researchers? Do they get to talk to more people in that process?
Yeah.
What do you suggest?
I agree. I think you got to figure it out. I agree with what you just described. When you're doing your dissertation, it's not thinking about it as one journal article. It's thinking about it as a body of work which you can disseminate in multiple venues. And throughout my career, I didn't mention it at the beginning, but I think I have like over 400 publications or something. But here's the thing, those are not all journal articles, and journal articles would not accomplish my primary commitment, which is bringing science to practice. Now, there is a point of publishing in, you know, journal articles that are distributed to scientists and scholars. There is a point to that, but that's not the end all be all or the only sort of possible distribution strategy. And Shuzi, the other thing that I appreciate about your question is that I very much embrace an interdisciplinary approach. Like, we're not going to solve these problems just solely within the field of school psychology. We will be absolutely dependent upon and in collaboration with our interdisciplinary colleagues who share our commitments. And so I would highlight that you publishing some of those types of synthesis articles, review articles, guidelines articles, some of those types of things that you're referring to. Oftentimes, when you do a really great literature review, most journals, I didn't even mention that, you got to figure out how long the journal articles are acceptable within them. So for instance, I'll just give you a few pointers. Right now, School Psych Quarterly limits the length to 6,000 words. Okay, I was previously editor of School Psych Quarterly. It's a good thing. You need to be succinct. You ought to be able to state it specifically and succinctly. But the thing is that some types of analyses don't necessarily lend themselves to that. If you had to go over a bit, you can justify that in the cover letter. So you try it. But you know, if you have a manuscript coming in at 15,000 words, there's probably no justification that's going to get you there. But if you had a justification for 7,000 words, you might be able to get it reviewed. And notably, it might actually end up being longer because the reviewers will ask for more information. But my point is, in contrast, like with School Psych Review, the target there is 35-page limit, but yet again, if somebody made the case for their article coming in at 38 pages and you could demonstrate that this is the reasons why, then I could still distribute it out for review. You got Journal of School Psych, which seems to not really have an upper bound, so you can write long, but yet that can also work against you. The more information you give those reviewers, the more likely they're going to find some problems. So don't just think that you can overwhelm them. You're not going to overwhelm them with content, right? They'll end up getting cranky about that too. So you do want to be succinct with it. But hopefully that's helpful to think about the different outlets, but also thinking about book chapters, thinking about the opportunity to publish content in book chapters in other journals. And then the other one that I would highlight is publishing in various outlets, professional outlets, whether that be for administrators, whether that be for like the NASC communique goes to school psychologists in a direct way as well. In this instance, School Psych Review can also get you there, but it could be that you want to write a 3-page synthesis piece that's going to be featured in the NASC communique that kind of links to the core content and key findings from your journal article, right? So hopefully several of you are digesting this in that even though the questions and the way that it was framed at the beginning to me was to share information about how to think about publishing your dissertation like in a journal, I also want you to appreciate that there's a lot of potential outlets for your scholarship, and there's a lot of value to those varied outlets. Now, again, some of you might be interested in a faculty position, and some of you might be beginning to be involved in academia as a faculty member shortly after. So you'll want to consider that sometimes influences where people choose to publish, because if it's an institution where there's a strong press on high impact journals, they might do that a bit more than they would have otherwise. There's also, a thing called tenure. So you got to kind of attend to what are the guidelines for the institution where you are pursuing tenure. And after you get tenure, you can do some things a little differently as well. But it's kind of thinking about it holistically, I guess, is one thing that I would suggest. But the other thing is you might find that that's not the type of institution you want to be at if they're not rewarding the type of work and scholarship and the outlets that you prize and that you believe in, because as I mentioned, it's the passion that's going to drive this. And if you are able to pursue the research and scholarship that you're genuinely most passionate and enthusiastic about, I believe you will thrive. Everybody knows the best job, right? The best job in the world. You guys all got it. You know it. You heard about it? Anybody? Come on. The best job in the world, and Una might remember this because I tell all the undergraduates here at UCSB as well as the graduate students, the best job in the world is a job that you would do every day, even if nobody paid you to do it. But the thing is, you do it so well that everybody wants to pay you to do it for them. That's the best job in the world. And that's the job that I have. That is the best job in the world, because sometimes people think it's a trick question and they're supposed to answer like, oh, the best job in the world is to be a school psychologist, or the best job in the world is to be a neurosurgeon or a software designer. No, any of those could be miserable jobs if you're the person that probably should have been the school psychology professor, but yet you're the software developer coding person. That could be a miserable existence, but it could be the opposite, right? So my point is, as related to this, you're looking for goodness of fit. Ultimately, you're looking for goodness of fit of where to place articles, to place publications into outlets. Goodness of fit has to do with you as a scholar, as an individual, the science that you're preparing and distributing, and also thinking about who do you want to learn from that information, or who could potentially use that information. So again, I come at this from a perspective, I consider myself an applied developmental scientist, okay? I was at the University of Minnesota. I was at the Institute of Child Development. I did a child psychology program. I also did the school psychology program. For me, the Institute of Child Development didn't have enough emphasis on bringing the science to practice to benefit children. And fortunately, that school psych program was amazing. And they had a very strong emphasis on bringing science to help children, right? So for me, school psychology has always been this tremendously valuable intersect of the things that I'm passionate about and that I'm excited about and that I want to do. And that's why I'm reading journal articles every day. Well, they're not journal articles yet, I guess. I'm reading papers every day that hope to be journal articles. And it's so exciting because someday you might be reading those articles as published, but I always feel so much gratitude that I have an opportunity to read those and provide feedback and help some of them get into the appropriate shape and form such that we can share it. And unfortunately, the other not so fun part of the job or responsibility is you have to put your name on papers that say reject and no longer, please do not submit this back here. You submit it to another journal. And we try to give you enough constructive feedback that helps facilitate that. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, Yeah, so think about it that way. This is not just about doing a dissertation to then publish a journal article. This is about doing your dissertations that you're passionate about, that you're excited about, that you believe in, that will make a contribution. And you can also think about what might be appropriate outlets, including journals, but also thinking about other professional outlets, newsletters, and depending upon the topic. I think, Shuzi, you had mentioned one about autism, girls with autism, as I recall. That's going to be a topic that's going to be widely, broadly interested way beyond just school psychology, but I would say school psychology, yes, and a whole bunch of other colleagues and scholars and professionals, right? Yeah. What other questions you folks have?
Thank you. I really appreciate that answer.
Yeah. What other questions you folks have? Anything else I can help with?
I'm curious what your advice or guidance would be for someone who might not see themselves currently on a track towards a faculty position, where like making the decision about submitting to a journal, does that make sense for a track that's not going towards tenure? What would you say to that person?
Whew, okay, so here's the thing. It will never be held against you if you publish journal articles. So if you want to possibly be a professor, but maybe not, but you're not sure what the institution will be, or you might want to be a practitioner. If you're not quite sure, it will always be a credit to you to have met that esteemed objective of publishing an article in a journal, for instance. So I would never discourage you from doing that, no matter what career path you're choosing. I would say that within the applications to academia, it's very valuable, highly prized to have those journal articles that you have contributed to, co-authored, and then maybe in some instances taken the lead. Certainly those help give you a competitive advantage within the academia. And that's the interesting thing about publishing that I found, is that publishing seems to open a lot of doors in terms of it keeps a lot of things open for opportunity. And if you enjoy it, I mean, obviously if it's miserable for you, then that's not a good thing to pursue. But if you enjoy it, and maybe some people are really good at it, like some people understand how to do sentence structures, and there's all these fancy words for the grammar details that I obviously don't have, even though I've been like lifelong editor person. I'm not that guy that I don't like. People say things about sentences and I don't even understand what they said about the sentence, but I see what's wrong with the sentence, right? I get that part. So my point is that you don't have to be really great, but some people are really great writers. They're just genuine, like they actually understand sentence structures and all that. I think my strength is I understand ideas and I really want to embrace the story and understand the dynamics of it. So it depends, but in some academic positions, you're not going to be publishing or expected. So there's different types of institutions, right, Madison? So that's the other thing. It's not like a one size fits all. There's institutions where a lot of your responsibilities have to do with teaching and service, and you do some presentations at professional conferences, but the publishing piece isn't as strong of a emphasis. Where there's other institutions where it's kind of that classic publish or perish sort of mindset, where the expectation is that your tenure review and your promotion and advancement will be largely tethered to your publications, your extramural funding, as well as including teaching and service and presentations. But you know what I'm saying, that you're going to want to choose the context that might be a good fit with you. But I guess you just got me thinking about it by asking the question, you know, well, would you still consider, or would you still encourage folks to possibly publish an article? Absolutely. If you got something to contribute, do it. I mean, I love it. Like right now, you know, just in the last couple of weeks, for instance, I've seen articles where we've accepted some articles, we've featured some of them in our social media. So for instance, it's where the person it was obviously their dissertation project, and they're the lead author, and then they've got the various faculty who are involved in it, you know, and other contributors, maybe some students. But so they're publishing it. And for some of these folks, they're working as a practitioner in a school district. And I love it. I get so excited by that for a couple of reasons. One is on our editorial board with School Psych Review, as I mentioned, we have a student editorial board, we have practitioners, we have administrators, and we have a lot of faculty. But some editorial boards are largely composed of just faculty, and that's just the science focus, right? They're not getting that other practitioner perspective even in the review process, right? So to your point, that when I see something published by an early career colleague, it's as exciting when they're an early career professor for me as it is when they're actually a practitioner. And like, I'm like, that's a feather in their cap, like good for them. And, you know, how proud must the institution be, the district, where now they've got, you know, Dr. Weiss, and she's published in this, you know, journal article, and she's like an authority. She knows her stuff, you know, like, because it's very rare that anybody in the district has ever published a journal article, but you folks are being prepared. University of Wisconsin, you're getting a strong foundation, right? You're getting that statistics, methodology, theoretical considerations. You're doing the good work, and whether or not you're going into academia or choose to be professional or whatever range of academia or administrator, whatever you choose to go into, it wouldn't ever be held against you. I don't know if that's helpful.
It is. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions you can get me riled up about? I get so excited. I love this stuff, you know? Yuna's used to it, right? You got to see this every week back in the day. So, okay, well, if there's no other questions, I can't see Paige right now. Let me see. Oh, yeah. Oh, no. Lexi, no questions from you either? Did we cover everything you wanted covered, Paige?
I think, yeah, we definitely did. Thank you so much, Dr. Jimerson. That was wonderful and a wonderful review.
All right. Hey, my pleasure. Hopefully that's helpful a little bit. Always open to answering more questions. So if you think of other things, just drop me a note. Thanks for inviting me. And always happy to share. Again, key take-home message for each of you. Well, a couple of them. One is you are the future. So critically important, and always have time for I always have time for students, because you are the future of the field, the future of the profession. You're going to make the difference. You're going to think of all the great stuff that I haven't thought of and that each of your advisors haven't thought of. You're going to do more. You're going to do better. And I believe in each of you. So that's the first thing, is embrace it. You know, you be the change, do the things that we haven't been doing, and help us to do better. Right. So that's part of it. But the other piece is embrace your strengths and pursue your passions, because each of you brings certain backgrounds and certain skill sets and certain understandings of the world that will help contribute and advance our collective thinking. And the things that you're most passionate about and that you believe in and that you want to pursue, those are the things where you're going to have the greatest impact, I anticipate. So you couple those two together and you get, you know, be the change, right? Be the change. And each of you will be, and for some of you, publishing will be a part of that, you know, and you're going to share some of your information in that outlet. So.
Wonderful.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Well, great to see each of you. And I look forward to further communications, perhaps collaborations, and bravo. Please say hello to each of your advisors. I do know each of them personally. So say that Shane Jimerson at UCSB said to say hi.
Thanks, Dr. Jimerson. And I'll make sure to drop the recording.
Okay. Yeah. Just send me an email.